Welcome to the Great Work of Your Life interview series produced by Revealing Genius. Our guest today is an iconoclastic leader, eclectic, both in background and what he brings to the table in terms of radical empathy, which we'll talk about today. By training, it's a very unusual combination. He is a clinical social worker and a cultural geographer. More on that soon. His career spans over 3 decades as, get this, a therapist, school social worker, adjunct professor, college administrator, C-suite executive, and most importantly, advocate for the prevention of bullying, violence, and discrimination against women, LGBTQ plus youth, and racial and ethnic minorities. He's currently the Chief Clinical Officer at Mid-State Health Network. That's midstatehealthnetwork.org, which oversees the public behavioral health system for a 21-county region in the heart of Michigan's Lower Peninsula. And today we're going to talk about the community initiatives that he either directed or chaired. Here's just a few. The Equity Upstream Lecture Series to raise awareness of health disparities in underserved communities. SUDS, which stands for Substance Use Disorder Services in Michigan. He leads their directors. And the Real Men's Project, a grassroots initiative to reframe the meaning of, air quotes, real man by encouraging men to model healthy and nonviolent relationships, which has culminated in a 10-year photo installation, Henry Ford Health Hospital in Michigan. This also gave rise to his book, which is called Real Dads, Men Embracing Nonviolence. He is the recipient of way too many awards to mention for his advocacy of LGBTQ plus youth, girls and women, and also his clinical work. He did a very interesting doctoral thesis focused on adoption and cultural identity in trans racial adoptees, and it was published in Adoption Quarterly. So Little Bird told me he has a dog named Lola, and that he also plays the ukulele. We're going to talk about that too. He is a bona fide creative. So please help me welcome Dr. Dani Meier.
Thanks, Mary. It's nice to be here with you today.
I'm thrilled to have you. Based on our couple of conversations that we had prior to this, I just had to have you on the show. Our listeners are going to be really fascinated with the work that you're doing and the work that you're aiming to do. So let's start with radical empathy. Before we get into the questions. So at 17, you dropped out of high school. You got your GAD, you moved to New York City, you went to Hunter College, you spent 18 months backpacking across Asia and Latin America, and then somehow you landed back in Minneapolis where you got 2 master's degrees and a PhD. And my takeaway is that combination of experiences really expanded your cultural horizons and helped you to gain that radical empathy. Can you talk a little bit about that before we dive in?
Sure. It's those experiences, which are not necessarily the traditional trajectory of sort of middle-class educated folks, to drop out of high school, to kind of go off to a new city and put myself through college without parental support, and then spend a year and a half in countries that have such differences from what we're used to in the US, Canada, Europe, places like India, Tibet, China, throughout Nepal and Sri Lanka. There's just such diversity of thought, of culture, of language, that I really felt my internal and external horizons were expanded in a way that allowed me to develop a kind of common humanity with people who a lot of us don't get to meet. And that, as I started to learn about the history of these different places as I was traveling, my empathy for their experiences, and for other experiences, other cultures and other countries that are experiencing challenges, just became a part of who I am. And the radical part is that it's motivating me to take action where I can and make a difference.
Radical empathy. Yes, I'd almost attach that to your personal brand, the Dani Meier Radical Empathy, which leads us to the first two questions. What gives you energy and what drains your energy?
So there are three things I think that probably give me energy. The first is people. So I'm a people person. I'm an extrovert. I'm someone who draws energy from being around people. Of course, it's even more energizing when it's people I love, people I am friends with, people who with whom I'm working on a common goal. But some folks are energized by time alone, by solitude. I'm that's good for me to have now and then, but I'm really energized by people. The second thing is creative expression, and I would say I am a very amateur artist, but I love to do all kinds of different creative things, and I'm also inspired by others' creativity. So seeing artwork that or music that is touches me in some way is very inspiring and energizing. And the third way is just sort of what I've mentioned already, just working on having a role in making this a better world. That energizes.
Yeah, makes sense. And what's interesting about it's like this theme that's like it's runs through the fabric of your life. It's like this combination. Like it's not just playing the ukulele. It's painting, it's music, it's sculpture. Like it's a combination of creativity that really energizes you. Yes?
That's true. Yeah. I'm not great at any one of those things, but I'm good enough to enjoy them and to sometimes actually produce pieces that are fun to live with on my walls. I don't sell them professionally, but it's nice to have in our house.
We're here today to talk about the great work of your life. You've done some amazing things, have had some amazing experiences. What do you love the most about your work, and what do you like the least?
So you've kind of alluded to this. My career was broken. I sort of see it as two-thirds in one domain, which was I was a clinician, I was a therapist, I was a school social worker. And in that phase, I really loved seeing people grow, people heal. I loved watching them or helping them to unload baggage, trauma from their past, and so on, often serious trauma. And I loved watching them become more strong and confident. So that was during my clinical years. The last decade, I was more involved at a system level, and I've loved the prospect of systemic change and being able to influence systemic change, reducing health disparities, and the opportunity again to make the world a more fair place, a more equitable place.
Thank you for that. Did you have a moment in time or some type of an event that enabled you to realize what the great work of your life would be?
I I didn't answer part two of your last question, which was what I like least about my work.
Oh,
So
yes, thank you.
if I can do that, because that is important, and it really involves working in an environment of scarcity. Uh, in this country, education and healthcare are expensive, but they're not highly valued, and so they're constantly under-resourced. Um, and working in an environment where you are constantly aware of budget cuts, and I mean, as a school social worker, I think I was laid off maybe 4 times in 20 years. I was always hired back, but it gives you a sense of how on the edge a lot of the budgets are for K-12 education, often for some colleges, and in healthcare. We work with folks who have Medicaid or are uninsured, and the available funds to support those activities are always at risk of being cut and have been cut. So that's my least favorite part.
Yes, makes sense. Yes, definitely. So, so you have a passion for health equity, and tell us a little bit about that. Like, where you could do perhaps anything you wanted. Why take that path?
So I was already overseeing a team that was doing substance use disorder prevention, treatment, and recovery in 2020 when the pandemic hit. And the pandemic highlighted for all of us what extreme health disparities exist in our country. We saw very high death rates and infection rates in communities of color. This was true in Michigan and true across the country. And shortly after the pandemic hit, George Floyd was killed. And there was a whole consciousness in the country around increasing fairness and addressing racial inequity. And one of the domains that I work in is healthcare. And so I really felt a sort of moral imperative to engage in making sure that the work that we do is available, accessible, and the same quality for all the populations in our 21 counties. And that's what's been a big part of my focus since the pandemic started in 2020.
And you wrote about it too. You did an article on COVID-19 pandemic mitigation for high-risk patients. There was also an article you did in Huffington Post, which I think is really interesting, coping with tragedy after the Boston Marathon bombing. So it's always been, you always have been drawn to helping folks overcome unexpected trauma. Yes?
Yeah. Well, the probably most recycled thing I've ever written, sadly, was when I was a school social worker and at a high school, and a teenager would die. Usually those were the result of a car accident, but it could be anything. It could be a heart condition. It could be violence. And I would, each time that happened, I would write something in the local paper to just kind of give parents something to do, a way to talk to their kids, a way for the teenagers to talk to each other, to not judge each other for how they grieve differently, those kinds of things. And that's really what I kind of put into that article about the Boston Marathon bombing, was just an effort to give people in those moments some things that they can rely on or use to kind of help cope with the crisis of that moment.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And you spend quite a bit of time on opioid substance abuse prevention, treatment, recovery. You're on a task force for racial equity. You serve on the Michigan Opioid Advisory Commission's community engagement and planning collaborative, amongst others. So that's also something that really drives you as well.
Well, when I came into this job, the state had mandated that the kinds of entities that I work for take over substance use treatment. They had been a separate, there had existed in a separate domain previously. And once we took that in-house and started to manage the substance use disorder prevention, recovery, treatment network, we don't provide those services, but we manage a network of providers that do. And the opioid crisis was something already that was an epidemic even before the pandemic, and it has continued. And while the pandemic, COVID, has subsided somewhat, overdose death rates continue to rise. And so that is a very central part of the work that I do and my team does.
And a lot of the work that you and your team does is very emotionally charged. Have you ever had any doubts or freak out moments about this great work of your life? Can you give us an example?
Well, I don't know that I've had it in this particular context or this particular chapter of life. Um, I've had, there's something that is evidently endemic to my family is, having, even as you do well, the imposter syndrome kind of hanging out in the back of your head, thinking, I can't believe people are asking me these questions or treating me as a content expert in these areas. I'm not sure that I am really worthy of this kind of respect for my intelligence or my expertise. That is something that is often kind of in the back of my head. I think it just is something that's part of, normal self-doubt. It's not something that's debilitating. But I've had moments where I'm teaching, for example, in a college setting, and I will be talking about something that I've learned about through reading and through research, and then someone raises their hand and says, "Yeah, well, I was in that organization, and the way you're describing it is not accurate." So, kind of being called out in front of everybody has happened a couple of times. Fortunately, it wasn't terrible. I wasn't like completely wrong, but there was just a lot more nuance that someone brought to it. But that's an example of a time when I felt like I was presenting content in a way that I felt was relatively informed, but I had left some things out that someone pointed out,
I
which
like
was
what you
good.
said.
Ultimately, that was good.
Yeah. Yes, it's always a gift. Definitely. So I like what you said about this chapter of your life. So in this chapter of your life, how do you define success?
In this chapter of life, I would define it as making a difference in reducing health disparities in our region. Unfortunately, these health disparities are rooted in systemic issues that are centuries old. I mean, they go back to how we treated Native Americans in this country. It goes back to slavery and Jim Crow and the rollback of voting rights. All of these things that are happening and have happened for centuries or have their roots in centuries old part of our history um, take time. They take time to undo and to reverse. So I I would define success as our starting to improve those health disparities. I know it's not going to be completely removed or changed in my lifetime, but to be part of getting it moved in the right direction um, would be how I would define success in this chapter.
It's a heady, lofty goal shared by many. How about your superpower? Where have you spent 10,000 hours honing your skill? At what are you the best in the world, Dani?
Well, I'm not sure that I can. I'm not sure that I've figured out if I have a superpower or if I do, what it is. What I guess I would say is that I've been lucky in that I can. I think I was hired in this job and in my previous job for having a certain kind of capacity to bring people together to work on a common goal. I think that's something that is very needed these days, especially when it comes to people that have very different perspectives. And I'm not sure that I have the superpower to make that happen in the sort of divided political context we're in. But bringing communities together or people together around a common goal or um, a common enterprise of some sort, I think is one of the things that I have capacity to do and do well.
For sure. And I can attest with the community initiatives that you have chaired or spearheaded that we mentioned in the introduction. Is there anything you wish you were better at?
Oh, lots of things. Both my parents were musicians, performers. I wish I was better at guitar, ukulele. I wish I sang better. I think being able to be a performer in of music would be something that I would love to do better than I'm able to do at this point.
Excellent. Well, maybe we'll have you back in a year or two, and you can tell us about, that pursuit, that noble pursuit. This is a question from Oprah's magazine. On the back page, she always asks this one question: what do you know about yourself to be absolutely true? What would that be for you, Dani?
I love animals. I'm in addition to my overall orientation towards the underdog, human underdogs, I also am very attached to all kinds of animal beings, dogs, cats, cattle. I feel strongly that if I had the capacity to do it, I would have a rescue farm with people who could help take care of the animals, and we'd rescue pigs and goats and dogs and cats and anything else that needed to be taken care of to give it a good life. I would love to do that.
Oh, I love that. Never say never. I grew up on a farm in the middle of nowhere, so I share that love of animals. I think maybe I was queen of animal kingdom in a past life, because they come running to me. I don't know what it is. It's uncanny, but just
They know. They know.
fun. Yeah, yeah. Like you, they know you're going to take care of them. So what would people be surprised to know about you?
I think people are often surprised to hear that, with all the letters after my name, with 2 master's degrees and my doctorate, that I dropped out of high school. That's not the trajectory that most people assume someone with that level of education has been on. And I've been lucky that that dropping out of high school came at a time when I had already had the values around education, and continuing my education was already imbued in me. So dropping out of high school was just a way to get out of where I was living at the time. It wasn't a way to get out of the traditional, pathway to education and progress in that way.
And learning. Yeah, I can tell you're a lifelong learner of many things, a student of many different disciplines, for sure.
Yeah, and because I'm not a professional in any of those arts, painting, ceramics, sculpture, playing instruments, there's always room for me to learn more. And that's something that I do hope to be doing for the rest of my life.
So we have 2 more questions.
Okay.
Then I'm going to pause, and then we're going to do a bonus question. And the last 2 questions, we need your advice. What is a book that inspired you to behave or think differently?
So the book that I probably, and I had to think about this because you had shared what the questions would be, and I had to think about the books really hard, actually. So the first one I would say was the Book of Laughter and Forgetting, which was written in 1979 by Milan Kundera. And in it, he talked about the forgetting part of the Book of Laughter and Forgetting was sort of how the onslaught of news and events can result in sort of a social amnesia, a way that we just kind of forget about the tragedy that happened yesterday, and because now there's a new thing. And I think that was written in 79, before the internet, before social media, all of that. I think now our collective memories are even shorter, and we forget about things, and forget about history, and forget about important pieces of what makes us American, what makes us people, humans. And so that book had a real impact in my realizing and thinking about how that social amnesia happens. And then the other book was Reviving Ophelia, which was a book written in 94 by Mary Piper about the social pressures on adolescent girls, and how they often, as they enter adolescence, start to have self-esteem challenges based on what's going on in society and what society tells them about being a girl or being a woman. That was, again, something that I was just becoming a therapist. I think I got my master's in social work in 93, and that book was written in 94. So it was just something that really opened my eyes a lot, and I felt was important work.
Thank you for those. Yeah, we'll put those on the must read list. Thank you. Last question before we pause is your favorite quote. What is your favorite quote or motto, and why is that?
So I had a mural in my house of all the different members of our family years ago, and our son at the time was a toddler and was crawling, and the quote I put next to him was "Do or do not, there is no try," and that was Yoda in the original Star Wars. Um, it really fit for him at that time because he would go over, under, around. He would get to from point A to point B one way or another. He wouldn't just try; he'd get there. But I think that's an important thing for me, is just knowing that I'm going to do it. I just have to figure out how I'm going to do it, and I'm not going to say, "Well, I'll try it," and then kind of walk away if it doesn't work. So that's a good one for me. I mean, I could, you mentioned Einstein. He's got a lot of different quotes around the dangerous parts of our world being more dangerous, not for the people who do evil, but for the people who sit back and watch and do nothing. So Einstein and Yoda.
Einstein and Yoda. I like it. Yes, we were talking just before we got on this call of how I love that you're such a creative. And I read an article just recently that surprised me, where it stated that Einstein came up with his theory of relativity while he was playing his violin. And he wanted to be known for that it was the creative side of his brain that stimulated what he was trying to solve for. He solved a problem while he was engaged wholeheartedly in the arts. And I mean, comically, he said he wasn't playing it very well. He was just playing it
right,
for
but
the
he was
sheer
using
joy
a
of it.
part of his brain that was creative, and
Exactly.
that opens up capacity to think in different ways, for sure.
Indeed. Indeed. Yeah. So he was always an advocate for the arts. So I'm going to pause here for just a moment before we go into our last bonus question. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
I don't think so. I mean, I think the main thing I'd say is that, I mean, I'm 63 years old. I don't feel like I'm done with whatever my life work is. I don't feel like I know what is my greatest success or what is going to be my greatest success. So I appreciate your interest in me and in doing this interview. I, may have some very different answers in 10, 20 years. But that's part of the mystery of life, and I'm good with that.
So I'll keep that door cracked open. So in 10 years, we'll come back and we'll play this over in terms of how you define success. And then we'll talk about that again.
Sounds good.
So thank you for being here. Our last question is, if a higher power, quote unquote, let's put that in air quotes, if a higher power would let you do, be, have, see anything, there are no limitations, what would that look like?
I used to say I wish I was magic, because if I was magic, then I could do all these things that would make the world a better place. If I could make a wish and it would come true, it would probably be to eliminate suffering from or avoidable. I guess I would say avoidable suffering. I mean, we're still all going to suffer losses, illnesses, deaths in our family and loved ones, but there's so much loss and so much conflict and so much that if we could avoid that suffering, war, for example, those kinds of things, I think, would be what I would focus on.
Eliminate avoidable suffering. And I'll underscore the word avoidable, underscore and yellow highlight that and draw circles around it. Eliminate avoidable suffering. Well said. Thank you. You've heard it here on the great work of your life. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you to Dr. Dani Meier. We appreciate you being here.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it, Mary.